A subcommittee meeting for HB 81, and we had 5 subcommittee members assigned. I see we have 3 of them here, which makes it a quorum, so we can go ahead and vote later on today. We have Representative Bernardi to my left and Representative Summers to my right, and we have Chairman Bose here at the time, and also Representative Murner as well. The purpose of the subcommittee basically is to discuss HB 81, which was a request to form a study committee to study all of the fees that are associated with, I guess, propane industry in the state. So that's the basis of this bill. Representative Marshall has joined us, so we here. So, and he's part of our subcommittee, so well represented. And so that's the purpose of this subcommittee. I understand we have industry representatives here, and I would invite them to introduce themselves. Mr. Scully, if you'd like to start and do that. Also recognize Representative Rung, who's the prime sponsor of the bill, has just arrived as well. So if you want to start introductions, and then we just kind of go around. Thank you. Well, thank you. Welcome. And you just Representative Bernardi will serve as the clerk of the subcommittee as well, so just pass it to him. And then with all the introductions done, I will invite AmeriGas, whichever one wants to speak, to come to the mic. And we've been told that you have something to say, so we'll have your say so first. And then after we discuss the AmeriGas issues here, we'll open it up for questions, for general questions involving fees in the state and how they're developed, how they're assigned, who has them, who doesn't have them, why they do, why they don't. Are some mandated by federal policy? Are some just because in business you have to have them? All that type of stuff. So with that, I will invite, who's going to speak? Okay. Sure. Absolutely. And just make sure you turn the mic on, and I'll turn mine off. Before we start, I'll just say my disclaimer is that I am a propane gas user for my home heating oil with Palmer Gas and Oil, in case anyone is interested in that.
Is red is, oh, yes, it is on. Okay. Again, thank you for giving AmeriGas the opportunity to come in and let us share a little bit about our company with you and a little bit of our history and sort of where we're going to go. And we really appreciate. Please ask us questions if you have questions. If maybe we say something that you don't understand or you would like a little bit more information, I'm going to give a really quick overview just to give you a little bit more background on the company. The company is headquartered in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, which is about 20 miles outside of Philadelphia. Um, we have been in business since 1959. We do service all 50 states. We have about 1.3 million customers, and those customers can be residential heat customers, residential gas or residential gas stove customers. They can be commercial customers, agricultural customers, commercial customers, whether it's a small pizza shop or use a shipping company that uses propane for motor fuel. Um, we do have district offices in almost all 50 states, not in all of them. And we have from a leadership, our leadership team does sit in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And then we have, through our management team, we have division vice presidents, which Jim Palkovic here is one of the division vice presidents. He oversees basically the central part of the country as well as the eastern part of the country right now. We also have someone like him working on our western. And then underneath, from a management structure, we have our director of territory operations, and they can be responsible for several states. Victor is one of, Speraza is our director of territory operations that covers New Hampshire, for example, and these guys know Victor. And then within, we have territory managers that run specific districts, so the day-to-day operations of the propane. We've sort of heard that propane really is just taking gas from a big tank and putting it into a smaller tank. Sometimes it can be challenging to do that, but that's really what we do, and as well as servicing our customers. Several years ago, pre-COVID, we did change our sort of business model a little bit, looking to go more online. We were seeing more of our customers wanted to go online and deal with us electronically. And so we did go away from what I think has been historically a traditional propane district model, where your manager and the customer relations representative is sitting in the district. We centralized our operations, and so now we have centralized distribution, centralized procurement, as well as our call centers. And we have a couple of call centers around the country that when a customer calls in, it's one number, they reach a trained customer experience agent, and we have a customer relations management system that allows them to go in. And so any agent can answer a phone call from any customer across the company. Um, while that sounds very easy, it was challenging in 2019 to go through that experience while we were setting up those call centers during COVID. And then as we were sort of coming out of it in 2021, 2022 sort of hit us a little bit more. And we have been having, I think, like others in the industry and outside of the industry, some staffing shortages. So we were having driver shortages, we were having service tech shortages, not just in New Hampshire, but company-wide. And we were also bringing on new employees. So whereas a lot of employees have been in the propane business for 10, 20, and 30 years, we were seeing, on the good side, we were seeing new people come into the propane industry, which is always good. But
If I may interrupt, I do have one question.
sure,
Going
yes.
back to your statement about you went to a more of an online business. Now, particularly in New England, but especially in New Hampshire, we have an older population, and where people are located in more rural areas, I'm sure they're using outdoor propane tanks. Most of those people are not in their 20s or 30s. So, was there any problem with when you went to a more of an online business model? Do they know how to get in contact with you? Because even though they may have a computer, maybe they're not used to going online for things like that. I'm just kind of interested because that might be one issue that we may not even know about online type of stuff.
So I don't have our specific customer breakdown of, unless you know, of online versus, but there's still the traditional, it's still a 1-800 number that you can pick up and call, and you will get a live person. And so what if you were a propane customer from 5 years ago, for example, and you had the number to your local district office, that number now automatically rolls in. So even if you were dialing an old number, it's going to roll into the 1-800 number that is still going to get you a live person. You do not need to be online in any way to do business with AmeriGas. If you would prefer to have your statement mailed to you, to call in and if you're a will call customer, call in and make your order, absolutely that has stayed the same. Or even if you want to do a little bit of a blend, you can do a little bit online, but still do a little bit over the phone. That still exists. Or if you want to do completely online, customers have that option too. So sort of moving forward. Oh, and what I handed you is, again, sort of a customer fact sheet that shows our current customers in the state of New Hampshire and our district offices where they serve out. So where the bobtails come in, they'll pick up the gas and they go out and make deliveries. And then the packet, what I gave you is our new customer welcome packet. So every customer, when they become a customer of AmeriGas, will get this packet. And it includes our terms and conditions, which is basically the same version of our residential customer agreement that a customer could sign online, or they can do it. We would mail it out to the customer if they didn't want the online experience. We would mail it out to the customer. They could sign it and send it back. And then again, the T's and C's that are in there is basically the same as the residential agreement. So what that lays out is the relationship between the company and the customer. So in those T's and C's, we do disclose how what is customer equipment, what is AmeriGas equipment, what our fees and charges are, so the customer can see that before they become a customer of AmeriGas. And those terms and conditions have been online at least since 2012 that I know of for sure, but probably even before that. So if a customer is looking at shopping around, they can go online to AmeriGas's website, and all of that is available online for them to see what the charges would be if they were to become a customer. So that's what's in front of you. Then just to go back, again, this particular year, obviously we don't ever want any customer to find it difficult to get in touch with us. That's why we wanted to shift our model so that anybody, any customer could call at any time and get a live person, and they can walk them through and help them deal with whether they wanted a delivery, whether they had a service issue, they didn't understand something on the bill. That really was the goal and the aim of what we were trying to do, and have very systematic training so that every customer had the same experience. So this year in particular, we know that we had some issues coming with our call centers. And so we've been really training our call centers to be able to do two primary things. One is to answer the phone as quickly as they can. That is actually the easy part. Then a little more challenging is to answer the customer with what they need with one call resolution. And then if they're not, where we've seen there has been a little bit of a breakdown is following up, reaching back out to the customer, making sure you were resolving that customer issue so they don't have to call multiple times. So what we've been doing to immediately deal with that issue is, in particular, when we heard a little bit more about this, one is we created a specific call queue for New Hampshire. So customers in New Hampshire right now are calling in to only our senior level CXA agents at the moment. CXA is Customer Experience Agent. And we're going through, and so we upgraded the scripts, the telephone scripts, to make sure they had more information to better be able to answer the customer's questions and really get to that one call resolution. We also looked at, and our primary goal during the winter is always delivery, excuse me. So we have had some of our service techs that normally would do tank pickups, for example, or other routine service work. They are in bobtails making deliveries. So some of our service work we did see began to lag behind what we would even consider acceptable levels. So we did see that tank pickups did lag behind. So in working with our service department, we have now engaged a third-party vendor to assist us in picking up any outstanding tanks that needs to be picked up. And we changed, we know specifically there has been, we needed to clarify our policy on underground tanks. And we've historically had, because a lot of our customers who have underground tanks are acquisition customers, Our company has really grown through buying other companies and growing through acquisitions, and records don't always transfer easily. So we may not get a customer file from someone who was a customer of Michelle's Propane from 20 years ago. So we don't know what the original arrangement was with an underground tank. So we put in our Ts and Cs, which have been there for a while, that if you have an underground tank, it is the customer's responsibility to pay for the removal. We know, and that we generally were not selling our underground tank because steel is an asset for us. But we've now changed that policy in New Hampshire. So I believe we have 26 tanks, underground tanks, that need to be picked up. What we're going to do is negotiate individually with the customers and sell them the underground tank, so that there doesn't have to be a disruption to the property. But if they don't want to buy the tank, we will go ahead, once the weather permitting, and pick it up.
If I may have a question at this point, could you go into a little more, I might know the answer, but could you go into a little more detail on the underground tanks and why you do what you do, and why don't you just take them over and, without any issues and things like that?
May- Well, I'll explain sort of then. I don't know if you want to jump in. Sorry. I'm
Unless,
jumping
unless
from
that's
that.
coming later. I mean,
Representative, could you clarify the question? Exactly what are you looking for on the underground?
well, the statement that you made that you did some changes, and that you're going to sell the underground tanks back to the customer, but issues about transfer or buying and selling the tanks. What goes into that? Why why is it more difficult than just a simple buy and sell transfer, or why even sell them? Why don't you just keep on using them?
So,
Okay.
I'll do my best to answer that question, Representative. So a lot to unpack there, but so underground assets, as my colleagues behind me know, I mean, there's a lot of effort and time that goes into putting in those particular assets. And typically once a customer has that asset, the last thing they want to be doing is digging up their property. So in the past, and certainly in current situations even today, if a customer calls and they want to exit business with AmeriGas or even our counterparts, if there's nothing we can absolutely do to cure that relationship with that customer, we'll typically offer an opportunity for them to either buy that asset. We may exchange an asset, an underground tank, with our competitors, whether it's here in New Hampshire or anywhere for that matter. Or if push comes to shove, we can certainly work with the customer to remove that asset and either have somebody else do another underground asset, or they may choose to go above ground. But the underground asset is certainly a more complex installation versus a typical residential installation where you might have a vertical DOT tank across the next to the house, a 500-gallon above ground that's outside the house. In this part of the country, which I was raised in this industry, this time of year is very difficult as well sometimes to pull those, although it is 50 degrees here today. There are times, certainly when I started in this business in '98, that those tanks would be frozen for the entire winter. So you would work with the customer. If they so choose to want to take their business elsewhere, we would make arrangements to remove that asset once the winter season was over. Does that answer your question, or did I?
Well, as a follow-up, I'll ask a question this way. I have an underground tank. It came with the house. It's approximately 17, 18 years old. Let's say there's an issue with the tank. I don't know what could go wrong, but let's say there's an issue with the tank. My gas company comes, I assume I call them, they come to fix it. Do I pay for it?
Is it your tank, or is it the
They
company?
assumed ownership of the tank
Okay.
when I purchased the home. It was a new home at the time. It was 18 months old. The tank originally belonged to Eastern. I wanted Palmer Gas as my own. And Palmer says, "Yeah, you're a great customer. We knew you in Salem. We sold you oil. We'll sell you gas here." And they said that they would take over ownership of the tank. As far as I know, never had to look into it after that. It was like a transparent transfer, no issues. So my assumption is that they took over ownership of the tank.
Yeah, so what I would say is, generally speaking, if it is a tank that is owned by the company, repairs that pertain to the tank, or sort of piping even probably up to the second stage regulator, the company would take care of. Generally speaking, that's how it would be at AmeriGas.
Thank you. Taking the question. This is actually a follow-up on that. I have an underground tank as well, but I noticed when we looked at the bill, the complaints we were having, some of them were the fact of when they had complaints with their gas company, they were told that they can shop around. As a fact, we heard that today. They can shop around. But if they have an in-ground tank like myself, so if I'm upset with my vendor and I have their in-ground tank that was built, and most of the new homes in New Hampshire are getting in-ground tanks, and I wanted to switch to AmeriGas. They own it. What's involved in transferring it? Do I have to pay to have, so just to change companies, do I need to pay for the a brand new tank? Do I need to pay for the digging up of the one I have now? What's involved for me just to shop around?
Again, what I'm going to say is, generally speaking, first, it would be whatever was in, if you had an original contract. So if, let's say, for example, that you became, I'm going to use AmeriGas. You became an AmeriGas customer, you have a new home. You want an underground tank for aesthetic or other reasons. We would have a contract with you saying, okay, it's going to be an AmeriGas tank. AmeriGas is going to put it in the ground. These are the charges that would go with that. And then there would be a provision that would say, and if you wanted to, if you were to leave, this is what it would cost to either have the tank dug up, or if there was an opportunity for the sale of the tank, you wanted to buy the tank. Because if you own your tank, generally you can shop around and have anyone fill that tank. The homeowner then would be responsible for the maintenance on the tank unless you otherwise contracted out for it. What I see in the industry, and again, we'll turn over if what I see is not other people's experience, but the customer generally may not have that original contract, or maybe there wasn't even an original contract to begin with, or you bought the house from a developer and the developer had a relationship with the company and there's no documentation. And so now you're stuck with no documentation. What we were looking at, we still try and find that documentation. So we'll look to see, like, did you pay tank rent at any time? We try and uncover who owned the tank, and then we try and resolve it on a case-by-case basis. Because it is expensive to dig up the tank, resurface a fail, there could be damage to. It's a heavy crane that sort of comes in. And so we really, the propane companies generally don't want to dig up the tank. We want to leave the tank in the ground. So it can be an arrangement with another propane company. You can have that sort of conversation. Obviously, we're going to try and keep the customer as much as we can. We don't want them to leave. But I don't think there's a specific industry on how it's done. I think it can be case by case. But what AmeriGas tried to do to help clarify that, since we had so many acquisition customers, was put in our terms and conditions, if you had an underground tank and you wanted to leave AmeriGas, it was the customer's responsibility. If they wanted if AmeriGas wasn't going to buy the tank or sell the tank to the customer, that it would be the customer's responsibility to dig up the tank. And that is where, what I would say specifically here in New Hampshire, because we've had a shortage of our service techs and because some of those service techs have been in bobtails, we have been behind, although we haven't been immediately offering to sell the tank to the customer, we also haven't come out to dig it up. And that's where we have failed the customer.
If I could add,
Representative Rose?
Representative, the only other thing I'd add to that is, as mentioned prior, is there may be another scenario. It's your, we own the tank. The relationship is so damaged that you are very incentivized to break that relationship. You may reach out to an Eastern Sierra. They can contact us, and we have historically, not just here in the state of New Hampshire, in the industry in general, we can swap the tank. So they can bring us an asset, like-to-like asset. So the competitor would still own your tank. We would transfer ownership of that, take ownership of a new underground tank into our yard for use with another customer.
I think Representative Rose has a question, but before, indulge me one second. Example, 500-gallon underground tank. Is the tank? All tanks the same?
Well, no, they're not all the same.
Okay.
And they're not all called the same, depending on where you live in the United States. But a 500-gallon, any underground asset is going to be more expensive typically than the same size of an above-ground asset.
Oh, yeah.
So you have that aspect of it. There are other safety requirements that come with an underground tank. There's cathodic protection checks that's incumbent upon the supplier to provide for you as a customer. So there's variables in that. And then undergrounds can range anywhere from a 100-gallon underground tank. We have a lot of those in the state of Florida. And then obviously where we have higher usage here in New England, a typical underground is a 500 or 1,000-gallon tank. So you have tall risers, meaning the refill point on the tank, there's shorter risers and various size and forms and fashions of each of those size tanks. So
Zobos?
Thank you. Following along this line of questioning, is it possible to standardize the process for transfer of ownership of a tank from one vendor to another? I've changed propane vendors 4 times in the 16 years I've lived in my house. And each time the process for changing ownership of the tank has been different. And from a customer point of view, I think that's confusing. It can sometimes be daunting to the point where someone would not change vendors because of the difficulty of exchanging the tank. So my question for you guys is, would it require legislation to set up a standard process, or is that something that the industry would take on to do itself?
Again, I'm going to speak for AmeriGas. I would say that is something that obviously we would want the industry to take on. I know we have a lot of gentlemen's agreements that we would work through, and so that it's clear. But that's why AmeriGas puts that in our terms and conditions, so you know what you would have to do if a customer wanted to leave us. They know at the time of contracting what our terms are and what they would have to pay if they would want to leave AmeriGas. So we feel we've already provided that within our terms and conditions. But I think again, speaking for AmeriGas, but then speaking for the industry, I think it would be something the industry would like to tackle first before seeing legislation.
I'm just going to ask a follow-up question because, as I indicated before, I've changed vendors 4 times. I've never received a contract from any of the vendors to whom I have changed or from whom I left. So I have no idea at this point in time what my status is with regard to my tank. I'm happy that the company comes and fills it up periodically, but beyond that, I know nothing about my tank. I don't get charged a rental fee, but I do get charged what they call a safety fee every time they fill up my tank. And I have a question about that for you later on. But my point here is just to point out that there is no written agreement that I'm familiar with. I've done business with Eastern Propane, with Suburban Propane, with Townsend Energy, they're my current supplier, and with one other company whose name I've forgotten already, but, and I've never had a contract about my tank.
Okay, again, I'll look to Leslie, but I would still say we would rather tackle that as an industry, which we can easily do here in New Hampshire and with the assistance of the trade association, as opposed to having legislation. I also think this is where companies, again, now with a lot of the online, even though there is the larger population is sending out that sort of material, getting contracts, it makes the relationship much more clear with the customer, so they know what the rights and responsibilities are.
Representative Bernardi has a question.
So following up on the same line, we need to know how divergent your terms and conditions are from everybody else's, because it seems that everybody's got a different way they play in the sandbox, and that's the problem. We need to have something more standardized and uniform. You know, if I have fuel oil and I want to change a fuel oil distributor, not a problem, right? But here it's the tank, it's the connection, I mean, there's all sorts. Is there a contract? Is there not a contract? I've lived in the same home that I built 22 years ago. I never had a contract. No idea about a contract with an underground tank. So there needs to be, I guess what you're hearing from us, a standardized way you're going to do business so people understand it plainly and clearly. Is everybody going to have a contract? How's it going to work? How are you going to be able to change from vendor to vendor if you want or need to?
Leslie, do you want to speak to this?
You could answer now, or you can answer
Yeah.
later. What would you prefer?
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure. Good.
So that's a great question. My name is Leslie Anderson. I am in charge of the Propane Gas Association of New England. And there are different terms throughout the industry. Our industry is made of companies like AmeriGas, that's the biggest in the industry. You know, they're in all 50 states. And then we have small, family-owned, David Richard is here. He's not the small, my typical small, I'd say a medium-sized company, that's family-owned, that's here. But the companies offer different things. Some companies offer 24-hour service. If your, system goes down the middle of the night, they have somebody that's going to be there in 30 minutes to get it started and start working on fixing it for you. Other companies don't offer service, and they might have a lower price per gallon because they have less overhead. But there's a wide variety of businesses out there. And they also have different fees depending on the type of customer, how many gallons they use. The more propane you use, the less you pay per price per gallon. It's just like milk, If you buy a small thing of milk, it costs more per volume than it does if you buy a gallon of milk at the grocery store. And if you're just using propane for a generator, you might have a minimum use fee or a tank rental or tank usage fee that you have to pay because, on a year like this, you might only have that generator running just for its safety checks and just for a day during the year when the power goes out. And the company has got at least 2 tanks there for a generator, which is a $1,500 to $2,500 asset that they are providing at their expense, that they are insuring, at their expense, so the homeowner doesn't have to, and they have to make up the cost of those tanks. And normally it's done in the price per gallon. Some companies put all of their fees into the price per gallon. Other companies break it out and they say, like for a generator is a good example, if you only use 250 gallons, you're going to have to pay, if you use less than that, you're going to have to pay a minimum use fee, for example. And this number might vary depending on the company and the size of your tanks. But if you go over that year, then we're not going to charge you a minimum use fee that year because you're going to make it up in your gallonage that you buy. And that's to the customer's benefit in that case. Because if they didn't have that, they'd probably have to charge a rental fee for those, and you'd pay for it every year, whether you used a certain amount or not. So there is a wide variety, and the law that governs it, first and foremost, is, under the UCC, your contract that you have with the propane supplier. If you don't have a contract, we could say everybody has to have a contract, but in a case like that, then you're locking people into contracts too. So if you don't have a contract in place and you're not happy with the company that you have, then you should be able to change to another company. And I know there was an issue here. I listened to the testimony when you guys beat Bob up on the meeting that he was there. And I apologize that I wasn't here for that. I cover 6 states, and I had a big dinner meeting in Massachusetts that night that I had to be at. But what was I talking about? Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, I'll offer to help customers if they call, and we have a relationship with the AG's office and the Consumer Protection Group here, and they actually refer complaints that come in to our office first, and we reach out to members of the propane industry because we don't want to be, here having to testify against questions that have come up. We want to resolve everything. We want to have good customer service as an industry. So when I heard the testimony and talked with Bob, the next week I was at a meeting with Michelle, who runs the legal department at AmeriGas, and I said, you guys have got a big problem in New Hampshire. How can we fix that? So, we have got to address this. And it sounds also like we need to make sure that we are transferring tanks in a timely manner between companies when people have underground tanks and they want to change suppliers. It's easier with an above ground tank because the new company can come right out and set a new tank and they can connect you. But with an underground tank, the company is not going to deliver into somebody else's underground tank. That's not legal. You can't deliver into somebody else's container. That's in the state law, not for propane, but just for general container law. That's in the state.
That gets to the crux of what I was going to ask later on, that there is a prohibition of, you just can't say company B would you please provide propane gas into this tank that I just fired company A for? They just can't go in there and just start adding gas, is what you're saying.
Not if the company owns the tank. So I have an underground tank at my house.
Not if the company
and
owns the tank,
I
yeah.
own the tank. So I could change tank companies tomorrow if I wanted to.
Was there is there a reason for that other than it being a state, you said it was a state law?
Yes,
uh,
so it belongs to
Having some
somebody else,
RSAs
and it's-
available from New Hampshire would be helpful, that describes that.
So that container belongs to a specific company, so they own the gas in it until the customer is paid for that gas that's delivered into it. And they've also done a safety inspection on that tank. They've done a pressure test to make sure there's not any leaks from the tank itself all the way into the line, into the house. They've checked all of it, so there's our safety rules too that have to be done when a tank is changed out or when ownership is changed out. And a new company comes, they'll come, inspect the tank normally and do a pressure test on the new system before they take them on as a customer when that
So
happens.
it's a liability as
It's
well.
a
as safety,
liability
yeah.
issue. You
I'm-
don't want to
that's what I
pick
thought.
up from somebody else without knowing that they've followed the procedures
Right.
you have in place.
And I apologize to Representative Partial, but he's been waiting to ask a question, so I'll defer to him right now.
Okay.
Thank you for coming today. Now, did I hear earlier that you told me that you informed us that a number of these underground tanks you've acquired through acquisition?
I don't know for sure, but if we generally, I would say generally speaking, yes. I'm sure the number of tanks that we have in New Hampshire were AmeriGas put in the ground, and we have a contract to show that. But just generally, our company has been one that has grown through acquisition. And we did a big acquisition, for example, in 2012, where it almost sort of doubled the size of AmeriGas. And so a lot of that, we didn't always get the customer records that came with everything. So in my experience, when these issues have come across my desk, it's generally where the customer was an acquisition customer and we don't have any underlying documentation. If there's documentation, we always look to that first.
Yes, follow up, please. Yes, I'm looking at your clause 14, your terms of agreement. And it tells the customer that they are responsible for all costs of the excavation and removal of leased equipment, and companies not responsible for furnishing, well, it goes on. But it sounds like you've put the responsibility of removal of an AmeriGas tank entirely upon the customer. Am I reading that correctly?
If there is no underlying contract, and we don't know, this was an attempt to try and get some uniform policy together. So there wasn't this one-off every single time. But generally speaking, this is what's here so that customers could see it. They could say, I don't want to accept your terms and conditions, AmeriGas, come get your tank. And they can reject what these terms and conditions are, and we will come pick up the tank. What has happened, again, we were trying to, in light of not having underlying documentation, sort of putting it together when we don't know what the original arrangement was.
No more comment on that.
Representative Murner?
You mentioned a scenario that is exactly mine. A house, it's up in Twin Mountain, subdivision by the owner that built the subdivision. He cut a deal with the gas company, so all the tanks that are sitting there, he built his multi-million-dollar home that's in my subdivision. It's a nice subdivision, but now that I'm in the house, it's 11 years old. But we're under that, we're locked in there. There's no paperwork, like you were saying earlier. So the only way out of it is we would have to have the tank dug up.
Or you could buy, like that's what we're saying, you would transfer the tank, whether it was AmeriGas would sell the tank or the company that owned the tank would sell the tank directly to you or could sell it to a
So
competitor.
you still can do that. There's no liability to whoever's selling the tank.
I'm assuming it would come with a bill of sale and the liability would transfer with the
would.
sale of the tank.
Yeah, because we've been talking about that since, for a year now about this, because we're in a lousy contract. And I used to say, I think it's a conspiracy because he gets his gas probably for free for putting these 17 tanks in.
I'm going to say no comment.
So, I'll let you continue, but, I just want to make a statement that it's, absolutely, we here in New Hampshire, about 80% of our businesses in New Hampshire are small family-owned businesses, and we certainly wouldn't want to put any restrictions or regulations in effect that would affect particularly family-owned businesses. I apologize if I'm not very sensitive to a large corporation, but we want to make sure that we don't hurt our family-owned businesses. So it would be great if the association, perhaps to be a member of the association, they may want a few things to be standardized. But I just want to make that clear that we're not out to make any regulations here if we don't have to, because we know that will probably affect the small family-owned businesses the most, and we don't want that to happen. At least I don't anyway. So if you please continue, and when you're done with your other information, we can open it up to maybe more questions involving specifics on fees and everything.
So again, what I'll do to bring it to a close is go through a couple things. One, again, AmeriGas puts all this information in front of our customer at time of contract so they can try and make an informed decision. Two, we changed our business model to a more centralized model around 2019. And we had a little hiccups in the road at that sort of the transition, particularly during COVID. This particular year, we still have had some issues with driver shortage and tech shortage. And then with the changeover in a number of our customer experience agents answering the phone, we know we are working on those things to address that. So specifically, one, we're continuing training with the customer experience agents. We've taken all of the New Hampshire calls and put them into a separate queue. So they're going to more experienced agents so that those resolutions, so the customer's not saying, I called AmeriGas and they're not calling me back. We want that one call resolution so they really only have to make one call. We are always looking at our terms and conditions to say, can we do something better? Are we disclosing as much information as we can so the customer can make an informed decision? And then here specifically, understanding the issue of the tank, we've looked at where we are with our tank pickups. So we are going to try and sell or transfer ownership to the 26 tanks that we see right now that are underground tanks in New Hampshire. And we've contracted with a third-party company to pick up any of the above-ground tanks. And then what we will do is on your fact sheet, we have all of the contact information, and specifically for our colleagues and our competitors, that they have that number to call with Victor Speraza, the Director of Territory Operations. So if they get a customer, if Eastern gets a customer and they say, we want to switch from AmeriGas, Bob Young knows who to call. So that process should be much more streamlined. And that's what you're hearing our commitment today. This is what we're going to do. We don't want to be back in front of this committee again saying, hey, AmeriGas made a mistake or we didn't put our customers where we know they should be. This is really what we want to do. Again, we have almost 30,000 customers. We made, I think, almost 40,000 deliveries since October 1st to now. We do have a lot of really happy customers. We want to continue to have happy customers. But we do have a couple things that we're going to work on, and you have our commitment today that we're going to get those done.
So I guess the main question is when, how soon, and are some things already in effect?
So some things are already in effect. So right now, again, with the calls going through, we are looking, I get a daily report from the vice president who's in charge of our call centers to make sure I can see what those New Hampshire numbers look like. We talk about it. We have several meetings internally to go through those numbers and make sure we're hitting the targets that we want to hit. We have also, we've looked at our service order and working with our service department. We've engaged that third party. So I would say for tank pickups, probably 90 days. I just think with weather and with ground and by contacting the customer, we want to make it so that it's convenient for the customer who generally want to be there when we go to pick up the tanks. But from any backlog of customer service issues, to me, I think that's really 30 days, if not sooner. Tank pickup, I would probably say probably 90, just given the realities of the weather conditions.
And Representative, from an operations standpoint, to add on to that, we definitely struggled with delivery staffing for much of the winter. We were fully staffed at this point in time from a delivery standpoint, essentially cleaned up on any delivery backlogs across the entire state. In fact, we're sitting better than we have in several years in that regard as well.
So I'm kind of curious. Unfortunately, Representative Rung has left the room, but I suspect that the packet that she sent, she won't return? She will, okay. The packet of complaints, but assuming that she comes from Merrimack, I'm assuming she's collecting a lot of information from her constituents in Merrimack. Have you found, right, also the AG list. I was just kind of wondering how many of them came from Merrimack, like to see if there's maybe a geographic or regional issue as opposed to the rest of the state.
I haven't seen that. I can take a look at that and we can see if it is sort of, if it's a geographic issue as opposed to maybe just some other issue, but I haven't seen her specific facts.
Yeah, they're just stats. They're not,
Yeah.
they're just complaints from various companies. And, yeah, you're out there tenfold at least.
But we do have a specific tracking mechanism of every AG complaint that we get by state. So certainly we have that detail.
But you haven't looked into it as far as if it comes
So we have looked
from
at,
primary towns?
I have looked at specific complaints coming into New Hampshire. And then we also have, again, it's called a CRM system, Customer Relation Management System. So every time a customer calls AmeriGas, it's like a note goes into the system that says, Michelle called in because she had a question about tank rent, or Michelle wants to know what the price per gallon is going to be for her delivery. All of those interactions get tracked in our system so we can see. So that's where any agent, if I were to call into AmeriGas, they could see all the times that I've called in or what my previous questions were. So I'm pretty positive if those complaints are there, we would have a record of it on our system as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question on the, especially when you brought up rental fees, and now I know that was based on a lot of the complaints there as well, is what is written or decides when when the company owns the tank, when the people own the tank, or especially when they own it, they're not when the company owns it, they're not paying anything, and then all of a sudden they start getting charged rental fees. What changes from an ownership to where they don't pay rental fees to a point where they do?
So generally speaking, if it is if the customer owns the tank, they're not paying any rental fees because they own the tank. They've either bought it from another reseller or they bought it from a propane company. But if they own the tank, or at least I'll say, AmeriGas doesn't charge customers for tank rent on tanks that they don't own. If AmeriGas owns the tank, it's an asset of the company. It's steel. So we charge a tank rent, and at time of contract, you will be told, so again, going to the various size, whether it's a 100-pound cylinder or a 500-gallon tank, you will be told what your tank rent charge is and that there may be a CPI or other increase. That is at time of contract. And so the customer will know exactly what it is, and the tank rent can vary basically for geographic reasons, maybe some competitive reasons, or again, the size of the tank. Where it can also be different is through historic industry practice, I will say, and Leslie spoke a little bit, there may be something called a minimum use. Whereas if you're a high volume customer, the company may waive tank rent because you're purchasing so many gallons. But if you're a low volume usage, they may say, okay, if you only are going to buy 50 gallons, you're going to have a tank rent charge. So different companies will disclose, if they disclose it, when tank rent may be applicable to you outside maybe that additional contract. So on here, I think we have in our terms and conditions, I think it is 2 times the volume of the tank. So the customer will know when if they've triggered that where they've used 2 times the volume of that tank in a trailing 12 months. So now they know whether they're going to pay tank rent or not based on the original contract. So again, where it can get confusing is if it's an acquisition customer, no one had the contract, they don't understand. Maybe the company has waived tank rent. If you call in and say, you know what, I had a late delivery this year, I don't think I should pay tank rent. Our agents are told you can freely negotiate with a customer and you can waive the tank rent for that year if you want to waive it for the customer, particularly if the customer says I may leave. So they're allowed to make concessions to keep the customer.
Just so I can, and I maybe missed it. So, but I thought we were talking about when you have underground tanks, you only fill tanks that are owned by AmeriGas, correct? So in that case, you charge rent to every one of your customers.
No. So and there could be a number of reasons why we may not. One is maybe at the time of negotiation, they said, we don't want to pay tank rent. And America said, okay, we'll still do business with you. You're not going to pay tank rent. Or it is a situation where we may not have that background. We may not know what was negotiated at the time. So we may say, because we don't know, we're not going to charge tank rent on that particular customer. Or we do have a contract and it says, if you have the minimum use and you meet those minimum use, we won't charge you tank rent. So there could be a number of reasons why on an AmeriGas owned tank, you may or may not have tank rent.
I hate to ask for another follow-up. I got one quick one if I can. Quick. Sorry, I apologize, Chair. Last question is, are the customers aware that of these different options they have when they begin business with AmeriGas? Are they aware of their different options and willing and ability to negotiate?
Yes. When we come in, we have this sort of scripts that go through. Sometimes maybe it could be a new customer package where we'll waive tank rent for the first year because you're a new customer. Those sort of things. We lay that out at the time of contract of when you will get tank rent, and then that's what we also put in the terms and conditions, what that tank rent is attempting to cover.
Thank you.
But I will also say, because of history and acquisitions, it may not be 100% completely consistent. But that is the goal of what AmeriGas is trying to do. At time of contract, you're told what tank rent's going to be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question might best be answered by Ms. Anderson. Do propane companies typically require customers to sign a new contract every year? I belong to a propane co-op that aggregates a bunch of gallonage and then goes out and talks to a company about giving them a special price for that gallonage. And those of us who are part of the co-op have to sign a contract once we're offered that price. I've never noticed that contract says anything about the tank. It seems to be just about the propane itself. But my question for you is that fairly standard practice among propane companies to require people to sign a contract every year, or is that unique to my situation?
So you normally will be signing a contract if you are pre-buying your gallons. A lot of people decide in the summer to lock in their gallons and pre-buy them because they're going to cost less when they buy the futures historically. Not always, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be more advantageous of you to buy your gallons in the summertime when gas isn't expensive and lock it in for the year. And in that case, you will have a written contract. The dealer's actually required to put a bond of a certain amount down to make sure that if they went out of business, you would still get your gallons, that's in. So they're going to have a written contract on that. And many of the companies included in that contract will include the tank terms that they have that are in there. Previous to taking this position, I was in Michelle's position at Dead River Company and wrote the contracts. And we had in there for underground tanks and in the contracts that I wrote. And we would put it in the pre-buy contracts. We'd also put it in a fixed price contract. So we offer fixed prices where you pay a little fee to lock in the futures price on it and your price won't go up. And if it goes down, you get the lower price. So there's like 4 different pricing options we had for customers depending on how they wanted to buy their propane and when. And in each of those, we had information in there about minimum use fees, and we also had information, and when they kicked in that kind of case, they would kick in at a certain gallonage amount. And we also had underground tanks in there, and that if you decided to change, you would either have to help pay to remove the tank from the ground, or you could buy the tank from us. That was in our contract.
My follow-up question would be, can you explain to me what a safety fee is and why it has gone up fairly steadily over the course of the last several years?
I'm not sure specifically what that company is putting into their safety fee. I could find out for you if you can let me know who the company is that's there. I would imagine if it's a safety fee, it might have to do with cathodic protection on the tank. When you have an underground tank, and specifically after 10 years, you need to go out and check it every year and make sure that it's not rusting or having any problems. It has adequate cathodic protection in the ground for it. It could be related to DOT requirements that they have, and additional requirements for delivering of hazmat vehicles. So I'm not specifically sure what they're lumping into that fee. I've also seen meter fees on some of the bills that people have come out. And I think one of the things that causes confusion is when there's acquisitions. There's a lot of acquisitions in our industry. And it makes it confusing when you have a company acquire another, and that other company might have been for sale because they weren't doing so well. Well, maybe they weren't doing so well because they weren't charging minimum use fees on some of their assets that were out there, and then they get bought, and the new company comes in and looks at the book of business and says, well, these accounts over here don't make any sense. We're going to have to change how we handle those. And then when there's suddenly a new fee, depending on how well that's communicated, it can cause some problems for the consumer. So we do try to work with the AGs and the consumer protection. If people call in and have a complaint, they direct them to our office. We reach out to upper management at our members, have them resolve it if they can, and then if it's not successfully resolved, it can go back to the AG's office. We also handle a lot of calls in the wintertime from the governor's office, where people will call, and a lot of times it's someone that's a single mother, they've got a kid, they can't afford to get heating, bills paid, and how can somebody in your association help out, and I'll reach out to a member, and they'll get them signed up with LIHEAP, or work with them to get a delivery made, and then put them on a payment plan to work it back. So we handle a lot of calls, and we try to make ourselves available to the places where people would go to complain, like the consumer protection, and refer them to us, because we do want to make sure as an industry that we have good customer service, and making sure that it's easy for people that with underground tanks to transfer those tanks if they do have a bad experience and want to change companies, is something that we will be talking with our members about, to make sure that we have a best practices in place, and the industry members are all aware of those best practices.
Thank
Oh.
you. And
Oh,
I would
sorry, go
also encourage you to, if you do develop these best practices, to share those with all customers too, so that those of us who are buying the propane and maybe wanting to change vendors will know what to expect when the time comes to change.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So following up after what our chairman spoke about is, I see a big opening here for the association to put together a template of, these are all the kinds of fees you can expect in dealing with your gas company, whether it be tank fees, safety fees, switching fees from one company to another, minimum use fees, what all the whole bucket of the universe of fees and costs might be in dealing with having gas as something that you want to buy. Then every company can come in and fill in, all right, on this master laundry list, here's how we deal with them. But that puts customers in the position to be able to say, oh, well, if I go this route, I see all these things that I have to pay or not pay, as the case may be, and not be confused. What we saw as committee members was just this unbelievable display of, I don't get why I'm getting all these fees and what's happening to me, and why I can't move simply from point A to point B when I used to be able to do it before. And it's because everybody's got a different way of doing business, and no one knows what all these ways are. I think if you create such a common template, you can't put the fees on it because that'd be antitrust issues, but at least here are the terms that may be relevant for the gas service that you want to buy, so that any customer wanting to make a change or initiate a service would say, okay, it's not as simple as going to the gas pump at the gas station and putting the gas in. It's way more complicated than that. And include in that, there may be differences if you own the tank or not own the tank, or don't know if you own the tank, there's all these variables. Thank you.
Well, it's in many ways, it's exactly what I was going to say, but I was going to add that, and just thank you, Mayor Gass, for giving us this information, but I count 17 fees right here in their list of potential fees. They kind of explain what they are, and they give you the price that you'll pay, including if you want a paper copy, they're going to charge you almost $3 per invoice. Now, I understand some companies may not list as many fees like that, but they may have a higher price per gallon to cover certain fees. You may not even be aware you're paying for them. But getting back into what I think it's time we can start asking a few questions. Are these fees mandated or business driven, or a combination of both? And is there any way that we can talk about those fees and why we have them? I guess you could say everything costs money, and rather than charge it into a price per gallon, we are just going to spit them out. Or maybe these fees, maybe most of them don't even apply to people. They're just there in case. So can we have a little discussion on that? And I know you're giving us a presentation, but we have other industries, other companies here as well. Maybe they might like to speak up on perhaps how they do business. I recognize, AmeriGas, you're quite large in this state, and you have certain capabilities that you're talking about, that you're going to be doing this and that and hiring people for that. Our other family-owned businesses may not be able, or may not be doing that because they're much, much smaller. So perhaps what are they going to do? Or is there a industry standard, at least, to be a member of your association?
No, we don't have any industry standards set for fees themselves. There's people here, I think it would make sense for the other three companies that have come today to talk about the fees that they have, so you can have an overview of what it is. I think most companies try to address it in the price per gallon, put all their costs into that for delivery. And then some companies, I think, add additional fees because they don't apply to everyone. So it may be more beneficial overall for their consumers to only be charged if it applies to them. So it's all competitive and driven by the marketplace. So we're not regulated at all in terms of fees.
Is there, if you don't mind, would some other company like to come up and say a few words? You don't have to if you don't want to. We're just extending the invitation.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Rashad with D.A. Rashad Energy in Dover. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll start with, like I said, AmeriGas offered like 17 fees. I won't go over each one of them, but what drives some of your fees? And are there some federal mandates? Are there some state mandates? Are there some business needs? I mean, can you describe a little bit about how your company does it?
Mostly it's based on the cost of doing business, but primarily our company in Dover, we only have one fee, and we don't have any other delivery fees, hazmat fees. It's just if we have a generator account, it's a usage fee, and those tend to be very sporadic. Sometimes you can have power outage and you go through propane in a day or two. Sometimes you don't have any power outages and you don't have a delivery for 3 years. So that's what we have to accommodate for the cost of steel. It has skyrocketed over the last 2 or 3 years. It's gone up triple. So typically, we just started doing usage fees, but we have to accommodate for that increased cost to be able to give that tank out as a loaner, so to get some recoup on that asset.
So does that mean that if someone is transferring over to your company, you would have to remove the other company's tank
Primarily, no. Most of the time, we have an agreement. So say, customer will call into our company, they're just expressing a desire to change companies because of some unknown reasons and whatnot. So they call in, we send out a sales rep to go out and take a look at the tank or the house to make sure there is no glaring issues as far as liabilities and whatnot. So if that checks out, we'll move forward in taking down the serial number and whatnot of the tank itself. And we will have the customer call in and express that they have to verbalize that they want to change. And then at that point, we will contact that company with the serial number. And it's as simple as that they will produce a invoice and charge us for that company's asset and sell it to us.
I just, oh, go ahead.
Off topic anyway. Yes, thanks for answering my question. And first, congratulations. I see you're very highly rated within the state of New Hampshire.
Oh, thank you.
91 years in business?
Since 1932.
That's a good run. Tell me, do you have problems with fulfillment due to labor shortages, drivers?
We're all experiencing some type of challenges right now with the labor market, and it is a known fact, and we're trying to work with a lot of OTECs right now and trying to entice young people to come on board in the trades instead of going to a four-year college. So we're trying to be a little creative with that right now.
Do you, well, the obvious question then would, do you find that because of this labor shortage, are your customers experiencing prolonged delays in deliveries or anything like that?
No, we've got a great labor force. We've got a lot of gentlemen that work a lot of hours and they're very dedicated. A lot of them have been with us 20, 30 years, and we don't want them to age out. We're really stressed out about that right now. So we're trying to get the younger generation to come up through.
Thank you so much.
This is just a quick mathematical question, and this is ties to all the fees. So just looking at the hazmat fee, which is just be on the safety and safety compliance. And thank you, AmeriGas, for providing the number of customers you have, because that helped out for the math, 29,632 customers. At this fee, which is each fill up, and I know everybody's not going to fill up their tank twice, but I'd say it's probably about the average per year. $7 million for the residents of New Hampshire per year just for safety fee. So I guess my question is this where the profit is made, is off the fees?
I would say without looking at the specific number, and I don't know the specific number, there may be reasons why, depending on, it is generally charged per delivery, but sort of like tank rent, sometimes these fees get waived, customers can call in, so I don't know what the exact dollar amount is, or the number of New Hampshire customers that tanked.
Follow up real quick. So the hazmat fee, can that be negotiated to be excluded as well?
If, again, our employees are allowed to negotiate with customers and provide concessions. So for a customer to call in and say, hey, we're happy to be an AmeriGas customer, but we don't want to pay this specific fee, and they have authority to give that concession, they can give that concession, yes.
Follow up to that. So, sounds obvious, but I'll ask anyway. So in my case, I get anywhere from 4 to 5 fill-ups a year, one at the start of the season and one at the end of April, and then I'm on my own after that. So would that hazmat charge be charged for each one of those fill-ups? Go ahead.
Mr. Richard, when you have customer changeovers, are any kind of difficulties in the tank changeouts, whatnot? How do you deal with that? How's your company address that? The tank, if they own the tank? And if they can't produce that information? Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
So we've spoken to AmeriGas already, and now we're speaking to someone different. Are you an AmeriGas dealer? No, okay. So if there was some kind of a standard in place, maybe not a legal standard, but a best practices standard developed by the Propane Association, would you find that something that you would find advantageous to follow? Or do you think you need, because of your own unique customer circumstances, you need to develop your own process for doing things like exchanging tanks, et cetera?
so this question is a general question, primarily to the association, but maybe anyone else. So as I look at these fees here, that from what we heard in testimony, the, the purpose of the bill was going to be if we needed a study committee to discuss fees, what they are, why they're needed, and why they vary in cost so much. So this is an opportunity to perhaps discuss that issue in terms of one company says they don't charge those fees, the other company says they charge them. It's like a LMO type of thing. But I also hear that whether you charge them outwardly or not, they all get rolled up into the price that you're charging for your price per gallon. Or are there fees that companies honestly do not charge because they do not incur? But if they did incur them, would they charge them? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out if we can ask the question, are these fees justified? And you could read right here and say, well, they're justified because you say they are. But do other companies, would they also charge these fees if they had to do the same thing that's what's listed here? I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that more of a question for the Propane Association, I think.
I think those fees are, probably the majority of companies roll the fees all into their price per gallon. I know we have Eastern Propane here, and I've talked with them about fees before. I don't know if you guys want to come up and talk about how you handle it. But it's just a different business model. You know, some companies lay it all out, but the majority of them put it all, I think, into their gallon fee, and then they might have a few fees for exception, you know, like generators accounts, things that are unusual, and would not fit the normal business model.
So, at the risk of not trying to sound trite, does that mean that if they roll their fees into the price of their price per gallon, does that mean customers are paying for fees that they don't use?
I don't really understand the question, because I think some companies are just breaking out their business model. So there are costs associated with hazmat licensing and DOT requirements. There's tests that have to be done and for safety reasons and different things. So I think some people are just breaking it down in their bill, you know, and others are just putting it all into one fee or one cost in the price per gallon. So I think it's kind of like getting an itemized bill versus getting just a grand total.
Well, okay, I understand that, but certain things like a reconnect charge wouldn't apply if you didn't get reconnected. But I wouldn't think that a company would, I hope, company is not charging that fee as part of their price per gallon, even though they're not reconnecting.
I understand what you're saying now. No, they would not be charged a reconnect fee if they weren't reconnected. That,
So,
Yeah.
so I get, we're just trying to determine if we need to study these fees further. I'm hoping we don't, but that's what I'm trying to get answers here. But I'll leave that question live for the time being and defer to our next individual guest here. Can you shed some light on how you handle customers? Yes, it's, I kind of suspected something like that. I just wanted to hear what people had to say. What's a meter charge? Okay, thanks. Well, Rose?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still a little bit confused about this question of rolling up fees into your price per gallon. Wouldn't that put you at a competitive disadvantage to people who shop based on the price per gallon? Can you elaborate on how that would actually work? Ms. Anderson, could you explain a little bit more about what rolling fees into the price per gallon is all about? I'm still confused about that.
well, I think I was just trying to explain what some of the companies are calling different fees. So you heard the meter reading fee, and that is the extra cost for going out and checking the meter at a location. There's also, I've seen some, you mentioned a safety fee. That might be also a hazmat fee that I've seen, which covers additional expenses for training drivers and DOT requirements that have come in. You know, it's a lot harder today to get a driver on the road than it was even a year ago. And some companies, I think, are addressing these by individualizing those line items. So they might have had a price per gallon, and then the cost of business keeps going up. You know, I've seen on my own bills, not from propane companies, but sometimes I get a delivery fee when the price of gasoline or diesel gets high. You know, so I think it's along the lines of that, when there's a new surcharge or something that comes in, that the company is trying to make up the expense of that program through the use of a fee. And then other companies like Eastern have decided that they're going to have one price and they're not going to have any additional fees.
And this is added on to fees, and it was one of the complaints in the bill, but it's not mentioned on here, is the minimum fill fees. So speaking from personal experience, if you have a 500-gallon tank, the minimum required for the company I have is 250 gallons to fill it. But if and it's hard to tell because you have a percentage meter on your tank, so you don't really know what's exactly in there. So I only needed 220. I still get charged for 250. So that extra 30 gallons I'm getting charged, I'm not actually using. Do you do practices like, is that normal for you do that as well as a minimum fee, minimum fill fee?
Um, looking at this complaint sheet here, stats, uh, you, you didn't get the trophy, but you're in second place. Can you, are you aware of them and know what actions you might want to be taking, if any, or we have no idea, we have no idea of knowing how old these complaints are. That's unfortunately, we don't know. But are you aware of many of them? Uh, unfortunately, we just have numbers. Um, so I have a general question. The way the industry is run here, even nationwide, I'm assuming, and we're talking only propane here right now anyway, right? So, uh, it's like a commodity. So it is volatile. The price is volatile up and down everything. So, is that why we have a lot of, number one, a lot of different ways companies handle their business? Uh, One standard way may not fit a model because of the volatility of say, propane gas, up or down, or does that play into why our propane industry business model is kind of like the way it is right now, as opposed to some other, firm, let's say, I don't know, I'm not sure if oil is the same way. Oil is volatile as well, but just the market itself, because of the fossil fuel type of ups, downs, everything. Is that why we have all these different varieties here?
I don't think so necessarily. I think it's probably more to do with companies that operate in multiple states. I think you pointed out that there's a lot of fees on AmeriGas's terms, but they operate in 50 states. So they're trying, I think, to have a contract that covers all of those 50 states as well, where it probably a smaller company wouldn't have those. And propane is the least volatile of all of the delivered fuels. It's stayed the steady, and prices are down from last year. There's an excess of propane. There's more propane produced every year than is ever used globally around the world. And a lot of it is just flared off and wasted. So the use of it is really a great way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because you're either using it or you're flaring it off anyway. I think it's just the way companies do business and the difference that exists between a small company and a larger company.
Thank you. Quick, yes, of course.
Just a quick question.
I don't know that oil is necessarily standardized. And oil delivery, the customers own their own tanks. So a customer can call one company one day and another company the other day. And as long as the company can get out and probably do an inspection, most of them require that to make sure that everything's hooked up right. They're not going to just pump it into somebody's basement. Then there's a lot more freedom and there's more competition also. There's more heating oil companies out there than there are propane companies because the propane requires a much larger investment. You have to invest $150,000 in your first truck and you have to invest in tanks to put out to supply, because to get customers, the dealers frequently supply the tanks. And that keeps the customer from having to have that big investment, you know, to buy a tank on their own. And it does make the changing a little harder because the companies have to coordinate and transfer the assets of those tanks when that happens. But I think that's the main difference that there is between propane and heating oil.
So I understand both heating oil and why do I have fees for propane, not for oil?
You have fees. There are a lot of fees out there for heating oil also for different companies. It just depends on the company. It's the same thing, but there's companies that have delivery charges and hazmat fees and safety fees for oil deliveries as well.
I'm just curious, what's the lifespan of a tank? An in-ground
The
tank?
lifespan of an in-ground tank?
Yes.
It depends on the type of soil that you have and everything, but there's tanks that are out there 50, 60, 70 years. I think
We have granite in the state, so.
I think that you'd want to be checking it every year if your tank is over 20 years old for sure. The recommendation is to go to cathodic protection at 10 years to get it cathodically protection tested. And then they can add anodes to it if they need to.
And is that something that a company would do on their own without even you even knowing about it?
They might call to coordinate to let you know they're going to be out, you know, in your backyard with wires and checking to make sure your tank is okay. So they probably would coordinate to let you know that they're coming to do that. But yes, companies, they have an asset in the ground that they want to maintain. So they're going to be out there doing that. That being said, above ground tank on the coast in salt conditions is going to be changed out a lot more frequently than its lifespan. A lot of the companies change those out every 5 years just because they start to rust and they take them back and they refurbish them and get them cleaned up and ready for reuse.
And again, since if the company owns the tank, they're responsible to replace it on their own and everything if need be, so. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So cathodic protection means it's a technique used to control the corrosion of a metal surface by making it the cathode of an electrochemical cell. So it's a test that you do to establish that the tank is still intact, that it's still structurally sound. Is that what a cathodic test is?
Yes, you're testing to make sure the cathodic protection system is in place and operating correctly. Because if you don't have cathodic protection in place, then you're going to have degradation of the steel in the ground because it's in contact with the soil and with the groundwater potentially with different minerals. So when you install a tank, you put in a cathodic protection, and it's if you fish and you have anodes on your boat that you throw over in the salt water, it's the same idea as that. Do you want to explain it better? You probably have more service experience than I do.
So for a typical 500-gallon tank in New England, one bag, a cloth bag or a metallic bag, what? Cloth? Okay, so it's a special cloth. Okay.
So it's not just a test, it's an actual system that's been installed, and you check the system, and if it's intact, then you assume the tank's intact.
Periodic testing is actually scheduled, we have to keep to. So if you install a tank today, we have to come back within a year and test it, and then come back again, I believe it's 18 months, test it again, then it gets on the 10-year. So newer installations are start right from the get-go, but older ones.
So if your tank was installed before 2014, it doesn't have this system?
No, it would have had the annual, but it wouldn't have been under that, required to have that periodic testing that we do now.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, is a homeowner entitled to ask the propane company to look at all of the tests and times they've come out to the house to do work? Would any other industry experts like to come up and speak at all? You have the opportunity.
I'm Dana with White Mountain Oil in North Conway. And I just want to, I mean, I don't want to talk about hazmat fees and all the other fees because we don't really, we have a meter read fee. But I just wanted to reassure everyone that there really is an industry standard with trading tanks. That's something I've been doing for more than 40 years, and it's worked seamlessly. AmeriGas had some communication issues, which they have talked about and they're going to address. But other than that, with the guys that are in this room and the 17 other companies that I deal with, trading an underground tank is simple. And there are serial numbers on the tank, and sometimes with a customer who says they own their own tank, I relate it to like a VIN number on a car. If you can show me the VIN number, if you can show me the purchase, we're fine. But if not, the propane companies keep track of those numbers. We invoice each other. Very rarely, I can't even think of an instance where we put a bulldozer in somebody's yard and dug up a tank. It's always done on paper. It's usually an invoice, or there the procedure is, I might owe Eastern a tank. So instead of selling it, we'll drop a new tank off in their yard. Or we'll give them a permission to pick up a tank from FW Webb and bill us. So that's how it's done. It's done on paper, and we all get along fine. One of the things I love about this business is I say we fight on the streets, but we all meet at the bar at the end of the day and tell war stories. So there hasn't been a problem trading tanks, and a customer should.
That's the way it used to be here for us, but not anymore.
I just want to reassure you that the consumer shouldn't feel that they're trapped with these underground tanks. Not in my experience. And I'll answer questions, but.
Anybody have questions? Representative Parsons? No? Okay. North Country doesn't have any problems?
I can give you my card. We go to Twin Mountain.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Anybody else would like to say a few words? At the end. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw someone getting up. Okay, well, with that being said, let's review what AmeriGas has said. Would you summarize in a commitment to the state of New Hampshire what you are currently doing and what you plan to do and when you plan to get there? Question?
Could you give us a supply of business cards so that we can contact you if we have any issues we can't resolve for constituents? Thank you.
So, now this might be highly unusual, I don't know. I haven't been in this position for, 30 years, but, may I ask, Mr. Scully, there is gonna be a point in time, this spring, I'm sure our committee is gonna be handling some Senate bills, and we'll be meeting at some time. Can I ask you to come back at some time, probably in the May timeframe, and, perhaps you can give us an update on what has happened. I'm not going to ask anyone else to come back here, but perhaps if they can go through you and you can just come back and even offline, or we'll reserve some time, maybe 5 minutes, and you can just let us know what how far they've gone. And, just this. I That's that's entirely up to you, but thank you for that. Yes, and I just might state that I know the representative from Merrimack. I would look into the Merrimack issues first, if you would, because I have a feeling that if nothing changes, we might be looking at a different but similar bill next year. So that's I think obviously Merrimack is the center of some of these complaints, it would seem, because it comes from one person. But, that's just, we're not gonna, that, some people won't let this go away if it's not corrected. That's all I'm saying. Yes. Ah, that's right. Yeah. I guess I'll give the association a chance to speak and see if you're going to do anything.
Yes, I think that you had some excellent recommendations, and I'm going to take those back to my members to talk about how we can make these fees more understandable and explain what they are and more transparent to the customers. So I will bring that back to my members in New Hampshire, and we will definitely discuss it.
I'm sure we'll hear that in May as well. Good, thank you.